life in 3 dimensions got me bent and got me twisted. I know I done said a lot, but I should probably stop pretending. I don't really hold the key and I can't really push a button. I just step up to the mic and try my very best to bust it, but I ran out of breath. It's tight in my chest, my feet just might fail. I can't stand the pressure.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Racially Speaking, where we have real and honest conversations about race as it's viewed through the lenses of faith, family, and vocation. I'm David Phipps, and it's just me today. I just wanted to drop in and give some thoughts about one of the bigger stories that's been out there in the news over the last few weeks, kind of earlier, just this month, the month of May. Many of you may have been following this or heard about it, but I'm assuming that a lot of you probably haven't, as it was big for a minute, and then I think kind of died down and is certainly not over. But unless you follow these kind of stories regularly, like I do, it just might not come across your algorithm on social media or your regular news feed quite as much. So, as always, there's always so much going on, but I try not to pick and choose out of convenience, but I try and pick and choose things that are challenging to think about and talk about, but that are also going to be helpful. And I think this story, what's going on with it right now, is and from beginning to end and in the middle, which is where we're at right now, I think has a lot to do with a lot of the things that we have talked about here on the podcast before. So I'm going to get into it a little bit. I do have notes and things that I want to hit on, but it is going to be a little bit jumbled, and I'm going to do my best to have it not be too jumbled. But let me get into it. If you haven't heard, Jordan Neely, he was a young man, 30, I believe, was choked to death on a New York City subway a few weeks ago. That's the bare bones scenario. So choked to death on the New York City subway. And there is obviously, I don't necessarily want to say two sides, but multiple points of view of what actually happened. He was choked to death. So he's was choked. It's been concluded that him being choked was his cause of death, even though he was pronounced dead a little bit after in the hospital. But The story is this man, Jordan Neely, was on a New York City subway and was making a scene saying things like, "I want food. I don't care if I go back to jail." And was, I think witnesses saying was belligerent, hostile, making people feel very uncomfortable. There's also accounts that say, he was doing these things like being loud, demonstrative, making people feel uncomfortable, as anyone would feel uncomfortable with someone screaming and yelling anything in a closed quarters public setting like that. I know I would. And then on the other side of things, I almost said but. I don't want to say but as if I'm trying to necessarily take a side quite yet. But I'll say that there was also a perspective of he was doing that, but had not, was not and had not and never did attack anyone physically or anything like that. And so that's kind of bare bones. And then in the midst of all of this, another young man, I believe 24, Daniel Penny, who was also an ex-Marine, came up from behind him and proceeded to put Jordan Neely in a chokehold. So a chokehold, I don't know quite as like all the moves and restraining procedures very well, but chokehold, and I've watched the video. Essentially, kind of it's coming from behind, and you can picture it, but is using all four limbs to restrain Jordan Neely, literally choking him. There's two other men kind of helping restrain him, but it's really Daniel Penny, the ex-Marine, who's doing this, and he proceeds to do that. And Jordan, it's graphic. I don't necessarily recommend everyone watching it. Occasionally I'll watch these videos to kind of just get a bearing on what actually happened. I don't watch all the videos, but this one I could stomach enough to get through to be able to do this podcast. but proceeded to hold Jordan Neely in a chokehold for 15 minutes, which I think is actually being not discussed nearly enough. That, 15 minutes, we are 3 years out, I guess, from George Floyd being choked to death by with a knee on his neck for 9 plus minutes. And this was 15. I think we've become desensitized to this regularly happening, and it does regularly happen. Those aren't the only two cases, but anyway, 15-minute chokehold. Did not release him until his body went limp. EMS was eventually called and came and tried to resuscitate, pronounced dead at the hospital. And as you can imagine, there is outrage on both sides, support on both sides. And so I'll kind of give some reactions to what happened and give some of my thoughts and talk about how this kind of intersects with some of the things we've already discussed here on the podcast. So like I said, people felt uncomfortable. So Daniel Penny, the former Marine, proceeded to hold him in a chokehold for 15 minutes, killing him. Of course, sorry, I forgot to mention, it's notable to say that Jordan Neely, 30-year-old, young black man, was known for being a street performer in the subways in New York City, well known amongst New York citizens, and at least in that area. Of course, people are calling into question, well, did he have a record? And to keep it real, the answer is yes. You can look this up as well. He had a lengthy record of arrests. I think he had been arrested 42 times, I read from sources all over the place, in the last 10 years. It's a lengthy record. For people that want to use that as justification for him being choked to death. Lengthy record. So I'll put that out there. So yeah, let's say, a lengthy record. I wanted to camp out there for just 1 second. Just to say that obviously that is not a uncommon thing to bring up when black people specifically are treated like this, murdered, shot, often in public. We always want to bring up the record. Well, did they have drugs in their system? Were they drug dealers? Never giving benefit of the doubt, right? That's a decades-long narrative. So I wanted to speak into speak some of my thoughts into that perspective on this alone. And my reaction to that is this. Daniel Penny, the ex-Marine who choked him to death, was a civilian. So I'll even say that he's a civilian. He wasn't even a police officer in this case that might have even known if it was even relevant, which I don't believe it was, but let's just say it was relevant. This was a civilian who had no knowledge of Jordan Neely's arrest record. So at the time, that really has nothing to do with him being choked to death, or choked at all, but ended up being choked to death. I know I keep saying death. It's because I think that we glance over how much of these issues are life and death, right? I've been pretty clear about that on here. But I don't think it had anything to do, that has nothing to do with justifying what happened based on what witnesses say was going on. I'm not saying he wasn't making people feel uncomfortable. I'm not saying what he was doing was okay. I'm not saying he didn't have a lengthy arrest record, lengthy one. What I read, it said it was mostly, for the majority, was minor offenses, but there was a couple assaults on women. I think it was maybe 3. I don't in any way want to demean that. I can't think of the word. Want to glance over that or make it sound like that's not a big deal? Absolutely, that's a huge deal. Those are big deal issues. Absolutely. But there's Daniel Penny had no knowledge of that, and it doesn't justify the manner in which he restrained Jordan Neely, and it cost him his life. It cost him a man's life. People, his family, his friends that have been interviewed, and even people that were witnessing it, just talk about the struggle he had with mental illness, struggle with homelessness, abandonment. His mom's, I believe, was murdered or passed away when he was young, so struggled with homelessness and all this kind of stuff. So there's so many things informing this issue. Again, I don't even think that is necessarily relevant. But I did want to say that does shed light on just some bigger issues that were going on that, yes, I obviously wish were handled differently. But, for argument's sake, play devil's advocate, I don't necessarily even think that is, I'm not even taking the side of, he was a good guy, he didn't deserve this, because I don't think a bad guy deserved this kind of treatment either. Quote unquote bad guy, I'm doing air quotes, but I just want to challenge, people who maybe your gut reaction is, well, he had an arrest record, case closed. No, I don't think that is true. I don't think it is case closed. I think that's super problematic to think that anybody deserved this kind of treatment in this kind of circumstance. Like I said, 15-minute chokehold. It's really bad. I said I watched the video, but the videos online that I can find are like 2 minutes long. 15 minutes of this happening. And speaking of, broken systems, how New York City's, New York City, right? It's huge. Something is not good when someone can be choked to death for 15 minutes and security, cameras, bystanders, people aren't notified or aren't able to intervene or something. The subway opens and closes and keeps moving. Stuff was happening. There was noticeable time for there to be, time for intervention. And again, this man ended up dead. Of course, there's racial elements. I'm not going to even press into that a ton, but Jordan Neely, young black man, Daniel Penny, former Marine, young white man. So people are up in arms about that in some way. But I wanted to talk about that because it sheds light, and I think our examples are very good examples of some things we've talked about on the podcast. I know I keep saying that, but here it is. And this doesn't even have anything to do with what eventually happens necessarily to Daniel Penny, who's on trial or going to be on trial now, because it took a while for him to even get arrested for this after some brief questioning. But Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, who I've been extremely critical of here on this podcast, even though, I know some people don't like us to get in anywhere at all political on here, but we're just at a time where we have to call a spade a spade. Ron DeSantis, who is seemingly going to be one of the next presidential candidates, who's done all sorts of things that I think are extremely problematic. Essentially bare bones, you guys, if you haven't caught on yet, his platform is racism. Just look it up. His platform is racism. That's what he is, even more than I would say a Donald Trump. He's actually trying to get support and trying to get his way to the presidency by being a racist, an outspoken racist. And so here we see him being true to his colors and saying, he put this out: "We stand with good Samaritans like Daniel Penny." And he linked a message to a crowdfunding effort raising money for Penny's defense, and says, "Let's show this Marine America's got his back." Okay. Calls him a good Samaritan. So, I don't even think you have to take a side necessarily in this, other than seeing how, what I think egregiously wrong that statement is, especially if you're a Christian and listening to this. Calling this man a good Samaritan and linking it specifically to him being a Marine and America's got his back. So you've got the whole America, patriotism, ex-Marine, military, juxtaposed against a black man and race. And I obviously have a huge problem with that. I think it's extremely terrible for him to word it like this. Again, calls him a good Samaritan, deserving of America's support. That takes the story of the Good Samaritan completely out of context, right? That's not what's happening, right? The Good Samaritan didn't choke the one that was the lowly or marginalized person, right? The opposite. Like, that's not how that story goes. So that's egregiously wrong. And then this whole military, Marine, America's got his back. We need to raise money for this person's defense. No questions asked. Is just a blind view still of all these things at play. I've mentioned things like former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick, doing the whole kneeling thing during the national anthem, and that's stirring things up, right? It sheds light on the America equals military support, patriotism type thing, or football equals patriotism type thing. And Ron DeSantis is making himself synonymous with Christianity, being white, and normative culture, in opposition of this whole woke culture and anything that would interfere with that way of thinking. Okay, and we've spoken about this a good amount of time on the podcast, and I have separately on social media a little bit, or even if you've talked to me in person about this kind of thing. I think it's really dangerous, and it has life-altering ramifications. It's not just a funny thing you see on TV of casual disagreement. It's real stuff, and I think it's a huge, huge problem. The Colin Kaepernick thing, many of you know this, but I'll say it again. He chose to do this, I won't say in support of the military, but people don't even understand that it was a Navy SEAL, a friend who was a Navy SEAL, who encouraged Kaepernick to do this in the first place. It had nothing to do with anti-military. It had everything to do with raising awareness of how black people are treated by police in this country. So it's just another common thread that quite frankly continues to disenfranchise the already disenfranchised and the marginalized. Just wanted to put that out there. And then I can't help but think about stories like Ahmaud Arbery, who I guess were 3 or 4 years out of from him being shot in a neighborhood for jogging down the street while black. This is a similar situation because that again wasn't police shooting unarmed black men, but it was again civilian citizens thinking it was their place to do this, whether it was self-defense, whether it was the right to citizens arrest in Ahmaud Arbery's case, just similar strands that, because I think we as Americans wait to have to react to this stuff versus eradicating stuff like white supremacist thinking out of the mundane in order to not have to overreact to these bigger instances. I think this is where we keep finding ourselves, right? Like in Ahmaud Arbery's case, the man was running. Somebody thought he's a burglar, and so he ends up shot to death in a neighborhood for just being black and running down a street. And their defense originally was, well, it was we were allowed to do that because of citizen's arrest, a law that was still largely in place for people back in the 1860s that were white people that were allowed to arrest fleeing slaves. Okay, that of course that law was amended once all this came out, but again, a black man was had to be killed, and then it go viral on social media for that to take place. Again, in Ahmaud Arbery's case, that was everyone tried to sweep that under the rug, and it was months later before it was even addressed. So wanted to put this out there, and then I can't get away from, as you should not either, the similar sentiment to George Floyd, Eric Garner, there's others, with the whole choking to death connection because of a suspected minor infraction. Of course, when George Floyd was murdered, people began to question, well, did he have drugs in his system? Eric Garner, a man that was choked to death, I think had maybe been selling fake cigarettes, something like that. Something, sure. Was it a crime? Sure, that's fine. Was it worth his life? I won't even answer that. Look, I know this is a little forward, not very lighthearted to pop in and do, but I wanted to get some bare bones, some raw thoughts on just this whole situation with Jordan Neely. Give some thoughts on how Governor DeSantis has responded, and that I think, he's not alone. He's got plenty of support. Just how icky, to put it lightly, I think that is of him and for people to immediately jump to. The whole, bad apple thing has even kind of gone out the window. When a police officer kills an unarmed black person, they, people like to say, well, that's one bad cop. The rest aren't like that. He's a bad apple. This is kind of the opposite. And I'll end with this, right? He's being lauded as a hero. They're not, people aren't even saying this is a bad apple guy at this point. They're saying this was the right thing to do as an ex-Marine, as an American. In the DeSantis view, this is let's give this guy money. I think $2 million have been raised for this guy. So the bad apple thing in this case has even gone out the window. And I'll say this as well. There's many Marines have even begun to weigh in on this, and ex-Marines adamantly saying, no, this is absolutely not how we were trained. He's an ex-Marine. They're saying we're trained to know how to restrain somebody without killing them, which sounds completely logical, right? Plenty of Marines have weighed in, adamantly opposed to what Daniel Penny did. Rightfully so. I think that is more the correct, quote unquote, bad apple response. And I'm not saying, Marines are the same as policing, or again, all police are bad. Not saying that at all. But there's continues to be a systematic way of doing things, and the people that are suffering the ultimate consequences are people of color, and largely in this case, black people. It's happening in cities, it's happening in the rural areas, happening West Coast, East Coast, in the middle, everywhere. So want to put that out there. Please, look this stuff up. If I got something wrong, don't hesitate to reach out. Please stay informed. I'm not saying obsess over it, but I think stuff like a story like this has a lot of layers to it that are important to understand. So I'll leave you guys with that. I hope listening to this kind of stuff does actually encourage you to join our Patreon. Please check our Patreon out. Support what we're doing here on the podcast. It is weighty, heavy work sometimes. So all of your dollars do mean a lot, and all of your dollars do go at this point 100% to purchasing textbooks for first-generation BIPOC college students, and we are well on our way to giving a couple $100 away in the fall, at least. So the more of you that join, the more we'll be able to give away, and I'm really excited and proud of that endeavor. So please check out our Patreon. I'll link it in the episode. It's Racially Speaking Pod / actually, I'm going to butcher it. I think it's Racially Speaking Pod /patreon.com, and you can join for as little as $1 a month or more to get access to bonus episodes, bonus content, bonus engagement opportunities, and more. But ultimately, support what we're doing and be part of giving that money away. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
The nightmare might scare you, no worse than reality. They hunt you by day, R.I.P. Ahmaud Arbery. Everybody got a time, but that's less than comforting. I hope I'm alive by the time they choose to comfort me. Mosquitoes in the vein, or leeches on my soul. This money on my mind is a fracture in my bones. You get crippled by continuing existence like a ghost. And they wonder why we drink, and they wonder why we smoke, and they wonder why we think that everything's a joke. I'm shocked that we can sleep, must be the thought of letting go.